What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Today we are talking about Season 4, Episode 18, Hard Time. Mike, how's it going? Is it hard time for you today?
Hard time only in that I busted up my fingy. So pressing the buttons today, Keith, you know, sometimes you just gotta suffer through.
Oh. It's not good. He's playing hurt. He's literally playing hurt here for you on the show. I understand finger injuries intimately. If you can't see, my finger does that now permanently.
Come on, bud.
It's not supposed to do that. Luckily, I have never been a good piano player, never will be a good piano player, so it doesn't make any difference. So not fun. Intense episode. You actually texted me last night or today. I forgot when it was. It was like, oh my God, this episode.
You know, JD, friend of the show, JD, had mentioned on the watch along link, which you can be a part of at patreon.com/KNM.
Sure can.
He was like, content warning on this one. And I guess I took that a little bit more flippantly than I should have, because it put me through it.
Yeah.
Although, and then another friend of the show, Jason, Tiberius Mo, cat is going for it. It made it clear. He's like, just temper your jokey jokes at the top.
Yeah, yeah. But
so I'm glad
I'm usually the one who does that.
Yeah, I'm glad that I was seen, and so I figured something was coming our way, and I have a lot of thoughts. I've probably more feelings than I have thoughts, so it'll be good to articulate those today.
I think that's fair. I've got some of both.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great time to talk about last week's episode of Rules of Acquisition. No, that's not
Engagement?
Right. Engagement. Yeah. There it is.
Well, and we had some engagement at the end. That's right. We were fighting. I forgot. We were playing a play fight.
Oh, that's right. That's right. We were verbal wrestling, even though I don't think we actually had any disagreement.
At least we didn't snap each other's necks over some bread, Keith.
Yet, give it time.
We do like bread. That is documented.
We do. Clearly, there's some bread, there's some gluten being eaten in our lives here. And so we had a lot of variation in your viewer ratings, which I think is very interesting. Joshua Cronin comes in with a 79. Jason Moe down with a 72. JD, first off, the movie I was thinking of, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, if you're wondering, gives it an 89. Harry Pothead with an 80. Worf's Big Ol' Boot Shivs gave it a small all rating with 58 coming down. But it is buoyed by Kevin Miles, who gives it a 91. If you would like to leave your rating and review, you can just put it on the YouTube and I will read it. It's going to be fun. And if you want us to read your comment, you can leave us a tip right there, the super thanks, whatever it is, and we will read your comment.
So nobody settled the debate. I think we kind of come right between us.
Yeah, I think on average, I think it's pretty much right down the middle. So you know what? I think Star Trek would say we're both right, but I think us would be like, we're both wrong.
Yeah, we got what we deserved.
All right, so let's talk about Hard Time. Let's get in, which aired on April 15th, 1996. The top song, and this is where it's good that we fixed the clipping on the audio, because we're going to hear Mike sing Because You Loved Me, Celine Dion.
Because you loved me. I got nothing. I have no comedy today, so you just got a bad rendition of the song. Is that the one that's like, for all my schmoo that you schmeedy schmow, for all my schmee that you schmada boo, but that is good, but do, but up, bop, and beep, bop, and dip, and dee. You left me high 'cause you believed I'm everything I am. Because you're smooth, yeah, like that, right?
I don't think so. I don't think that at all. But I hope somebody make that a ringtone.
That's totally the song, right?
All right. Hold on.
Okay, you get it.
You pull it up. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
The top. Oh my God. The top movie was Primal Fear, the Richard Gere film. At that point, let me just confirm that it wasn't last week, because sometimes I miss it. It is Primal Fear in its third week Definitely a big old movie. That's why I remembered it from before.
It was a big old movie. Okay, we're pausing the backgrounds. Now, we'd like to say thank you to Jacques Ross.
Jacques Ross.
For his cover of this song, since I'm going to try to get away from the Celine version. But let's see if we can get the hook here.
All right.
To my life, all the wrong that you made right.
Yeah.
For every dream you made come true. For all
Forever to leave you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I was right.
All right, you're right. Dude sounds good. Who was that again? Jacques?
That was me, man. Jacques Ross. Check him out on YouTube.
Jacques Ross. All right, check it out. Well, I'll have to give that one a listen. All right. So, Mike, if we're not watching Primal Fear or debating whether Because You Love Me was that song, what were you watching on TV?
A lot of stuff on TV, but Keith, ABC was airing a special. One of the things I used to love to watch to this very day is the 1996 World Figure Skating Championships.
I love figure skating.
Yeah, I can't even ice skate, but I always have loved figure skating, and just because this is what we do on this show, Keith.
Okay, so let me just put this in time.
Okay.
This because Nancy and Tonya was 92. Right. So is this early Michelle Kwan?
Michelle Kwan was the ladies' gold medalist. Yes, in the Worlds. Runner-up was Shen Lu for the silver.
I bet you didn't know, people out there. I'm a figure skating fan.
All
you
right,
would never have guessed.
Well, just so you know, the Americans also took home the gold in the men's singles. So who took that one home?
Oh, was that Scott somebody?
No. Would it be Todd Eldridge? And the Americans took bronze with Rudy Galindo. But Keith, unfortunately, overall, we lost the total medal race. We got second place to Russia. Russia still took in the most.
Although that's always a running tally, because if you're paying attention, this week, Russia drops medals right and left as they continue to discover all of their doping. So
that's fair. That's very fair. Okay, well, there you have it. That was what was on television on ABC.
Okay, there it is. You want to know, hey, what was Voyager doing?
Yeah.
Reruns. They're off for a couple weeks. So there you go. But in the hard-hitting news, once again, the Weekly World News, obsessed with Billy Graham. Apparently, maybe he had an endorsement.
Yeah, maybe.
But we're going to find out about, are we on the eve of destruction? Aren't we always on the eve of destruction?
Yes, but I would like to compliment Jesus's crown there. I mean, whoever went on that Photoshop was instead of just giving the 2-barb crown of thorns, they really went for a full allotment.
Okay, well, I can't find a way to make a rhubarb joke, so we'll workshop that for next week. I mean, I guess after he put it on, he rued the barbs.
Now Keith, waste your time.
Not even what we're doing yet.
With trivial trivia.
Okay. I'm going to help. So, this episode was directed by Alexander Singer, and this is Alex's last episode of Deep Space Nine.
Release the Singer cut.
Indeed. Last episode that Alexander directed was Starship Down. It has a teleplay by Robert Hewitt Wolf and a story by Daniel Keyes Moran and Lynn Baker. Both of them their only credit. This was once again a story submission. And according to IMDb, they were each paid the princely sum of $4,500 for the story by credit. Obviously, Robert Hewitt Wolf, longtime writer on the show, took
not
over.
Mark Lynn Baker.
Not Mark Lynn Baker. No, Lynn Baker. Just Lynn Baker. All right. So anyway, so let's do some trivia now that we've done that. So this episode features a performance by Margot Rose as Kapar Rin, one of O'Brien's jailers. She previously appeared in the beloved The Inner Light as Common's wife, Aline. In that next-gen episode, legendary next-gen episode, Picard is swept into an imaginary world for 50 years, just like O'Brien was swept. But it was a happier world, but also experienced all of that time in real time. Both of them iconic episodes from their series. Inner Light, some people consider the best episode of Next Gen of all time.
Okay.
Well, you haven't seen it, so we'll have to We should do the interlight at some point. When it was released in the UK, the scene in which O'Brien kills Ichar was edited to remove the sound of his neck snapping.
Huh.
Which is very annoying as we're, the sound people. Jim and Sean weren't working on this at this point because they were doing Voyager, but they definitely, Sean's duty would have been to create a realistic neck snapping sound.
Yeah, and interestingly, I had a comment about that because I felt, and I would love to ask Sean, and we will, because we will be doing another interview with him on the Patreon exclusive show.
Yes.
The Sounds of Star Trek with Sean Varney. And here's my question, because I had a thought as I was listening that the neck snapping sound was not realistic enough for me, and it almost seemed as if I bet you there were versions, and Network was like,
without a doubt,
we need that to be not so gruesome.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah. Well, speaking of Sound of Star Trek, I was messaging with Jim. He watched Sean's episode.
Oh, and he was like, I want in on this sweet interview.
I'm like, you're welcome anytime, buddy. So who knows? Jim might come on.
It was hard to hear his response, though, over the sound of just Emmys falling down the stairs.
There was true. They're always clanging together.
Because he wears them around his neck,
breeze. He's like a rapper with like 6 Emmys attached. He can't barely stand up. They're so heavy. Jim like lurching around on the floor forever. He's like, they're all dirty. He's been wearing them for 30 years.
Oh man.
Right. Great. So continuing on the trivia, Robert Hewitt Wolfe was always a big fan of this story. And he tried to persuade Michael Piller to purchase it at the time, but Piller was interested, previous showrunner. Wolfe tried again in the 3rd season, but again, Piller refused. Finally, in the 4th season, because Ira Stephen Bear took over, he was able to convince Ira to buy the pitch and do the episode. Wise decision. I don't know why Michael... Well, and that's like, no shade on Michael Piller, but I think when we think of Deep Space Nine, we think of Ira's Deep Space Nine. Like, that's everyone's go-to. And we're just beginning, Mike. I'm so excited. We still have so much more to go. So the character of Ichar hadn't been in the original pitch. Robert Hewitt Wolfe himself added the character, and I guess by definition, the turn of the episode. He also introduced elements from a completely separate pitch that had been purchased, but never made it into production. The other story concerned the discovery that Ensign Sito Jaxa from The Next Generation, the episode The First Duty and Lower Decks, obviously important character because Lower Decks spun off new anime series. But anyway, spoiler alert, in this story pitch, she was still alive. After being presumed dead, she would have been found held in a Cardassian prison since the events of the Lower Decks. This episode would have detailed her struggle to reintegrate into normal life and was basically a study of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. However, there was no motivating factor why Sito was suffering from the condition, so Wolfe decided that he had killed her cellmate, to whom she had become very close, that she had killed her cellmate. The episode was never produced, but when composing Hard Time, the idea of her killing her cellmate resurfaced in his mind, so he took that idea and imported it into the O'Brien story. That's some really good, just like writing, storytelling, mixing stuff together. Robert Hewitt Wolfe is an amazing writer. There's just no getting around it. So, and lastly, speaking of Wolfe's writing process, Celeste Wolfe, his wife, who works as a psychotherapist and is a licensed family counselor, acted as a kind of an unofficial consultant on the script. And I think you can tell that the treatment of PTSD here is done very realistically and incredibly well. And, not to harbor on it too much, because I'm always talking about it, way ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. Like our cultural understanding of PTSD at the time, and even just like therapy and psychology was very minimal, not for the therapist, but like the general cultural understanding well behind than where we are today.
Yeah, there was a lot of parallels from this episode to the Strange New Worlds episode that the Butcher of
Galatep,
yeah,
or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, but that dealt with servicemen and PTSD.
Yep.
I think not with kid gloves, but also with a lot of maturation or maturity, not maturation. And I felt this episode,
They're really growing up.
yeah, was equally respectful.
Yeah, absolutely. You know who is also growing up nicely and very respectful?
Yeah.
Mike, it's our patrons.
That's true, and I would like to welcome Peter Benke.
We have a promotion.
Yeah, Peter Benke decided to grab a pip. He changed his support level. Now listen, you can get all content at all levels at this point. We have taken away except for the top level will be the people who get a special secret poster that we are working on. We are sending swag your way. It's just been long time coming. But that said, you can still up your support to help us keep the channel afloat. And here are the people who do so: Brian Kilber Beersock, Kimball Beersock, Casey Clark, Jason Moe, Peter Benke, Joshua Cronin, Andrew Hayes.
Captain.
Captain. Jorge Navoa, and the Mysterious household. She chimed in on the Patreon today. Now, Anne is a little dubious of the YouTubes, Keith, and I don't blame her. But just know, Anne, that the water is nice and warm here on the K&M YouTube, so it's okay to wade in and have a conversation here. There are no a-holes. Worf's big old boot chips, Charles Babbage.
And we smack them down when they show up.
We do. Harry Pothead. And so do our other viewers. They're very protective of us and each other. I love it. CRM Productions, Nikolay Ivanovich Lobachevsky, Delusions at Noon, YouTube viewer James Hubbard, JD Makes, Colin Dagan, Chris Mitchell, CRM, Pat, Joshua Cronin, of course, the folks who have made us find things and sent us in the mail, JD, Lutz Kremer, Wyatt Eldridge. We appreciate each and every one of you. You can join the team at patreon.com/K and M. Keith, did you know that I also have a quick bit of trivia?
Do you?
Today, Keith and I, you might know from our other shows, are big in the theater universe. And today we lost an icon, Keith. Maybe you haven't heard the news yet. We lost Cheetah Rivera today at the age of 91.
Oh, no.
I don't think Cheetah ever appeared on Star Trek. But do you know our 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon into the Star Trek universe for her?
What's that?
Well, I will play it for you later on the outro this week, in post. She performed a very famous number from Bye Bye Birdie with none other than Brent Spiner of Data Lore. They do An English Teacher's Wife together on a celebration of musical theater, and I happen to have the video, and I will play it as we go out to say, on to the next voyage, Cheetah Rivera.
An English teacher, yeah, I did Bye Bye Birdie in high school. Well, that's very sad to hear. Certainly a theater legend. Brent Spiner in the original cast of Sunday in the Park with George. Dude, he's been a Broadway guy before he was a Star Trek guy. A lot of Star Trek people began on the Broadway. All right, so let us introduce our guest stars. And that, of course, Mike, happy for you. Rosalind Chow is back as Keiko, Margot Rose as Par Rin, Hana Hete as Molly O'Brien, FJ Rio as Muniz, and Craig Wasson as HR. So what do you say we hop into the screening room and discuss Hard Time?
Keep sleeping on the floor, Miles. Mike's gonna jump in that bed.
Wow. But you're fine with them sleeping at your feet.
Yeah, whatever he needs to do.
It's like a poor traumatized man sleeping at your feet, and I'm like, aha! Window of opportunity!
I mean, I'm not without compassion.
All right. There you go. Okay, so in our teaser, we begin with a slow pan down and an old man drawing on the sand floor. It's very dark.
It's not working.
I can see that.
I don't know why.
I believe. Somehow. It's going to happen.
There
it is. Woohoo! All right. Didn't have to cut.
Yeah.
Did you see the moment there?
Yeah.
Folks, if you're wondering what it looks like, if Keith and Mike are like, should we keep going? Should we cut? I don't know if we're going to hope we don't have to cut, but we might. It was that blank look on our faces. That's exactly what happens. Oh, what's up, Dee Dee?
Mm-hmm.
So, the old man is drawing on the sand floor. A decontamination beam crosses over him and wipes the sand clean. A door opens and 2 aliens come in, and we find out that the old man is O'Brien, and he's being set free after 20 years. O'Brien is thrown out of the cell, and we cut to contemporary O'Brien screaming as the aliens remove 2 gizmos from his head, and we see Kira is there. O'Brien is shocked to see Kira. Apparently, no time has passed. O'Brien spent 20 years in a simulated prison, and in reality, only a few hours have passed. But memories have been implanted into his head, and none of it is real. And O'Brien says, "It was real to me, Bajor." Bajor? Major. It
Well, I
was
mean,
real.
after 20 years, your speechifying is a little difficult.
Is that what happened? Was I stuck in the prison of my own mind for 20 years? I think my therapist would say yes. So it was real to me, which is the teaser, which I really thought was a great setup.
Yeah, it was a slap directly in the old face.
Yeah. Lots to talk about in the structure of this episode, but I really like, this is sort of like a general note before we get into it, but I really like that we begin in the aftermath, because the aftermath is the story.
Yeah.
Not the thing in it. And I think a lot of times they would do the story and then, throw in a little bit of aftermath, but it really is all about the post part of the traumatic stress disorder.
Though
So
I may argue later that I feel like maybe the most interesting story would have been some of the before, but we'll get there.
Okay, all right. Well, we're gonna find out.
I'm trying to shy away from like what I want it to be versus adjudicating what it is. So I will try to stay on the second track, but do feel like we left some fruit on the vine.
Did you want to see how we got caught and what he did?
I feel like it's important only because, we spent all last week with Ben being a defense attorney and protecting Worf's rights, and here this guy just got put away for 20 years enduring full-on torture, and Ben's just kind of like, oh, that sucks. I mean, I get the point that we couldn't get there in time. The whole point is that because you can do it this way, their method of delivery was so fast and so rushed. But also, how about like the aftermath, right? Like, was that humane treatment? Was that proper? Clearly, we can't undo it. And my fear is that, I'm sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but my fear is that next week we just like add it to the list of crap that happened to O'Brien, and we're not going to talk about it again.
Well, I mean, I think from the standpoint, this is where we get into Prime Directive stuff, because what are we supposed to do? Other than like warn other Federation folks to be careful when you're there.
Are you satisfied with the explanation they give? That because it sounds like he just like he made a mistake. It sounds very much like that Singapore caning thing, which happened around this time, right? Where like you didn't know you broke any laws, or if you get into North Korea and God forbid you take a Polaroid, all of a sudden you're put away. Yeah. So I guess that tracks.
I mean, it happens all the time.
When was that Singapore thing?
I mean, like if you were to go into North Korea, right, and we would try to work diplomatically to get you out, but once it's happened, right, once we've gotten you out, like diplomatically, what are we going to do? Like invade North Korea over it? No. And are we going to like what can we do other than like maybe sanctions or a stern talking to? But if you're already doing the sanctions, like there's not much you can do.
So it's interestingly, that caning that I'm thinking of, the spray paint caning, that was 1994, so 2 years prior to this. And then there's a lot of Total Recall in this as well, in my kind of sci-fi feelings, which was 1990. So maybe some.
Yeah. So I mean, but I think in terms of like if you're expecting the Federation to do something, it's also in the Gamma Quadrant too.
Right.
Like there's just not a lot they can do other than get him back. Or
and I suppose like even like if the teaser were him getting caught and it happening, is probably less effective than starting with the cold open of him in the prison cell. I dig that. Okay.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I fix it. So in Act 1, Cisco explains the situation to Keiko. O'Brien got too curious about the Agrathi tech, and they thought he was a spy. By the time they found out about it, they'd already carried out the sentence. and that removing the memories might be impossible. Keiko can already tell that this is bad. So Kira and O'Brien come through the wormhole home, and O'Brien wonders if this is a dream and he's still in his cell. And right here we see an amazing composite shot of the station through the windows. Being able to do that with the reflections, it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a great poster.
Actually, it'd be a great we have for our view screen on our AlamarEmmys, or is Act 1. This would be a good put in.
Oh yeah, that's true. We can do that. Maybe coming up next year.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see next season what our visual is going to look like. Who knows? So they arrive, and Julian is there to greet him. I want to
put a pin in this. We'll talk about it later. I feel like the writing of Kira in this scene here is the least supportive of Miles throughout the episode, or the least
Really? What did you? I didn't clock any of that. What were you thinking?
Well, I mean, a lot more people. They're not hand-holding, but there are a lot more eggshells around him, and they don't want to upset him or whatnot. And here, she won't even or a lot of Julian. We get a lot of compassion from him. I can't imagine what that was like, and here she's just, every time he's experiencing one of his feelings, oh, is this a dream or whatever, she's very clearly that was a hallucination, that wasn't real, none of it was real. So she's completely denying his experience by, I think she's trying to help him by being like, don't worry, Chief, it was all fake, it was a dream. But in doing so, it feels very kind of tone deaf.
Well, I think there's a production reason and a character reason. The production reason is that we're telling the audience it wasn't real. Yeah. So we are reinforcing how the structure of the episode and actually what happened. I think from the character's point of view, two things. One, Kira is a wartime person, right? She's not really a feelingsy kind of a person outside of her religious faith. But also, unlike Bashir, who is trained in this type of a thing, PTSD or dealing with a situation like this. Also, this is brand new for her too. Mm-hmm. She hasn't had time to learn and be briefed and how this works, what's going on. This has been an hour for her, so she probably hasn't had time to really think through the consequences of what O'Brien is going through here. So it tracks for me.
Okay.
I mean, you're right. I think she's a little direct, but I see why. So anyway, he arrives and his buddy Julian is there. He's going to run some tests and try to integrate O'Brien back in slowly. And to everyone's credit, they are taking this seriously right from the start. They're not overwhelming him with a whole mess of people there. They're not even having Keiko there. They are taking this very seriously. And Bashir asks if he was able to talk to anyone in the cell. And O'Brien says, I was alone. Then we flash back to his first day in the prison and see him thrown into the cell unconscious, and see right away that he was not alone and that he lied to Bashir. So a green guy gives him some fruit and O'Brien wakes up. He says, I've been alone here for 6 years. My name is Ichan, and he says, welcome to hell. And that is the end of Act 1. And interestingly, we're already into Act 2 at the 9:39 mark, which is very short teaser in Act 1. Just structurally, I thought it was interesting to see that quickly. So O'Brien, back on Deep Space Nine, fills Keiko in on the situation. We recap what we already know, that he went through this experience in his head and that they can't remove it. And they talk about the previous times where O'Brien had to suffer. So this is, he was captured on that planet. He was also tried by the Cardassians. So he's, there's a reason O'Brien must suffer. So alone, O'Brien tries to order some of his prison fruit, but the computer doesn't know what it is. Then O'Brien arrives with his cellmate, who also turns out to be a hallucination. So the door opens and there's Ichan. but it's a hallucination, and he gets replaced by Keiko.
Which makes
And
me
we see-
wonder if you're doing that kind of Freudian slip, what was him and Ichan doing in that cell?
None of our business, man.
20 years, man. I'm just
20
saying
years?
the reality of it.
Things happen. Things happen.
I'm not even joking, man.
Hey, please. No
I think
shade.
that
I get
subtext
it.
layer is there.
I mean, probably. Yeah. So Miles is totally shut down from the PTSD, and only now does he remember that Keiko was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you really think through the mind F of this situation, 20 years, and like to like arrive, because 20 years ago, you and I were on tour.
Yeah, we just met. I just, yeah.
And so we were doing Titanic, and like, what do we remember? We remember that we were doing the show. We remember some highlights from it. We remember some of the people. But like, if you asked, at that point, I'm like, literally on tour with people. 20 years later, you ask me like, if I had to do like a Facebook and you tell me what everybody's name was, not a chance.
Actually, I think you're underselling it. That's even with we're completely in a nice mind space. We're young. We're
Right.
having good life experiences, a lot of social interaction. This guy wasn't just away for 20 years. He was in the hole for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to talk about later just the whole mind F of being in the hole of solitary for a week, solitary for
Solitaire is torture.
20 years.
Although he
So-
wasn't. He was with Ichan.
Well, yeah, which
said he
brings
was.
up a really interesting question. I don't think we're given an answer to. I have some postulations, right? So was Ichan a hallucination the whole time? Was he programmed in order to keep him sane, so that they are not waking people up and having them be full on insane? Because you go nuts in the hole for 20 years with no
for sure.
personal interaction.
Well, and it really begs the question. This is the larger question for the end of it is
did they want him to? Were they trying to torture him the extra level of breaking him, as Bashir
like
says?
is the death of him killing Ichan, is that part of the story that is programmed? Did
Right,
he
what
actually
free
have
will?
agency in that?
What free agency does that? These are huge, important questions because they also waited till right before he gets out to do it.
Right? Is that so you wonder, like, all of the guilt that he feels about having done that, did he really actually have agency in that? Was that the programmed script?
Yeah, like
of
what a technology.
the
Now,
torture?
this is the other well, man, we're jumping right to the end from the beginning. But correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't we discuss that the founders have this same technology and had employed
Yep.
it? And
Yep.
weren't we like, wow, that's a really scary thing they can do? And it just turns out other people can do this too?
Yeah, sure. I mean, why not? They're also in the same quadrant. We don't know necessarily that this planet isn't sharing tech with the Dominion.
Yeah, this seems like a very dangerous weapon to be having.
Super dangerous.
And I like that they were just like, well, it's efficient.
Yeah, I mean, and like you can, well, and we really get into like prison ethics. What he went through, I think, is torture.
Straight torture.
Right. Food deprivation, being trapped in a room, and they point out there's like no bathrooms in there. Like, what's happening? Like, like an
That's
absolute
the point I
horror
was making
show.
up top, right? It's not so much that we should have fought to get him back earlier. It's that we can't. How can we stand for it? They tortured the guy. We're not going to fight for it.
But that's the thing. I mean, we have O'Brien back, and the rest of it, Prime Directive, that's their business. It's got nothing to the Prime Directive prohibits us from interfering with how they do stuff. And so it's grim. But to get back to the ethical part of it, is like, yes, so the actual program that he made him go through is incredibly cruel and torture and wrong. However, on the flip side, you serve a 20-year sentence, but you come out of it without having lost that 20 years.
Right.
So like if I had, if I murdered somebody now, did my sentence and came back and I was still 43, that's preferable than to come back and I'm 70, right? Because you get that part of your life back.
Well, I mean, that's actually, I think, one of the most interesting questions asked here. what are you getting back versus what is lost, right? Like, I don't. We're given.
Well,
I mean, I guess he's got some good drugs from Bashir at the end, but you don't. It's
well, but I guess like to spin this up, right? Excuse me. If the treatment in there were humane
okay
and
big
reasonable,
if. Yeah, big if.
right? But you could serve it in your head and then just walk out the next day. I think that's more humane than losing those years in confinement. You just experience them internally, but externally you don't.
Well,
and
right,
the rest
then,
of your family doesn't. You're not punishing people who are innocent, i.e. your family, your kids, or whatever, by deprivation.
So spoiler alert for the ending. I have a weird fascination / terrible inner fear of prison. And I think it's because my dad made me watch America's Most Wanted early on, and to this day I love to watch America's Worst Prisons. Things I'm obsessed with solitary confinement, with prison, with the whole.
Yeah.
I just can't wrap my head around it. And so I guess the question becomes: if you believe that the losing 20 years plus of your life is the deterrent, right? Versus, are there other forms of rehabilitation that could be taking place there? Like for O'Brien, if you believe that rehabilitation is the point of prison, then nothing is achieved. It's all lost. There's no benefit to the time. But had those 20 years in his brain reenactment been, like some sort of a rehabilitation process, he got his GED, he got another degree, like all those kinds of things. Then then instead of going to Starfleet, right? Why don't we just go to sleepy sleep for 20 minutes, have 10 years of Starfleet implanted in our heads, and become a ninja while you're at it, and then
you're
release us
matrixing.
Back? Yeah, why don't we just matrix? We clearly have the tech.
I mean, yes, and I think that the reality of it is we pretend like the goal of prison is rehabilitation, but I think in practicum that is very rare. Most of the time, it's just,
especially in the United States. Yeah,
in the United States. I mean, I was going to say it's punishment. No, it's not even punishment anymore. It's just profit now.
Yeah, well, now, yeah.
So, anyway,
I'm not sure what we're talking about, but
we're still in Act 2.
Those are the really interesting questions about this, right? I know that the focus is kind of his experience and the PTSD, and that is well handled. But I just think it opens so many questions. I'm really interested about the fight with these bad guys out here and with this technology that what was the episode where we were dealing with the Jem'Hadar and we discovered, oh my god, not all the Jem'Hadar are bad, but then we sort of blow up that guy at the end and we're like, oh, so we're not going to deal with that tech that Bashir was developing on the planet. And same thing here.
To help get them off the Ketracel White. Well, we're going to get more into that. Don't worry.
Cool. Because here I feel like this tech is like big time tech. Total Recall tech is important, and there should be repercussions for it.
Well, yeah, but it's not ours. So that's
okay.
I mean, we can't just steal it from them.
Anyway, Miles doesn't want to draw with Keiko.
So yeah, all right. All right. So later, we see O'Brien cutting up and portioning his food into little pieces, like someone forced to ration might do.
So even in his simulation, they're starving them.
Yes. I mean, and this is where you realize that
it's all intentional torture.
Their objective is to punish, not rehabilitate. That is very obvious that is the goal here. So Molly has a couple of lines and exits because, then
clearly, though, if you think about it, especially when dealing with people who are not of their, I mean, he's an outsider, clearly. It's a pretty effective tool to be like, yeah, don't F with us next time. Maybe.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's terrifying.
It might be terrible torture and inhumane, but efficacy, A+.
Well, and think about
they almost did away with him. They almost were able to it only took 20 minutes to life, but they knew potentially he was going to go probably end himself.
I mean, yeah. I mean, and they were able to do it so quickly, right? So we might, you get captured for a couple of hours and the guards come in and save you, right? But in this case, that 2 hours can be a lifetime.
The sci-fi principle, I feel that the writers left too vague and would have been better for the story, I think, because it would have kind of forced them to take a side, is we never truly find out whether the post hallucinations in the present time, is that residual from like the chemicals in the brain, or is that further proof that he was actually a manifestation from Miles in order to stay sane, and that's why he lingered? Like, we don't quite. None of that's quite answered.
I think it's left intentionally vague. I mean, and I think it is sort of a, whether or not we're telling a story about PTSD flashbacks, right? Or whether,
it's not the
because he
medicine
does
that makes him go away. He goes away when Miles deals with the trauma a bit, or at least admits the trauma. That's
right. However, he does give him antipsychotics at the end to prevent the hallucinations. So, I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. So on the table,
we'll have a short stem bolt.
Real short at the end. So at the end, on the table, they have a bunch of random fruits and vegetables, including cucumbers mixed with star fruits and a pomegranate. I think very future-y. It's also the 90s, so they have space placemats. Remember when everyone had placemats?
Yeah, my mom still loves placemats.
Really? Mm-hmm. I haven't seen like a placemat in practice in a long time, but when we were kids, of course, like you couldn't go anywhere.
I barely use plates anymore. Are you kidding me?
Me too. Me too. But we're sad and lonely.
Yeah, keep in mind, when we lived together, we ate Chinese food out of Tupperware.
I ate a salad out of Tupperware just like an hour ago. It's the big thing. If you're gonna have salad, you gotta mix it. I don't want a little bowl. It's spilling out into my lap.
You're totally right.
Anyway, so O'Brien is having a hard time adjusting to being with other people. He's getting 3 sessions a week of therapy, which is great, though I might bump that up to 7 at the start. And the food, we have some continuity issues with the food on his plate, which is now different, but he starts stuffing pieces into a napkin, and Keiko reminds him he doesn't need to be rationing. And he says that the guards didn't always remember to feed him. We flash back to his cell, and Ichen shows him where he hides his food. O'Brien, who is now bearded, asks how Ichen survived. And he says, by drawing on the floor with geometric shapes. And Ichen says, you need to learn to laugh or go insane. So he really is kind of here to function as the keep you sane device. Mm-hmm. Later that night, at Deep Space Nine, Keiko wakes up to see that Mike is sleeping. O'Brien is sleeping on the floor. I wrote Mike! Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, I think I Freudian slipped into your own fantasy.
Yeah, well, Jason made that joke last night. He's like, Mike, there's a space in the bed next to her. And I was like, you're right. Now, interesting thing here. I took a lot of screenshots of this. One, great partner because she puts the blanket next to him and takes care of him. 2, you could argue a good partner would probably lay down with him on the floor and try to share the experience, but then I had the thought that could be dangerous.
I don't think she should, no.
That could be dangerous. You said that maybe the sort of inverse thought to when you said, he had that 20 years, but at least the innocent people weren't subjected to losing their father for 20 years or losing their husband for 20 years. But at the same time, there's an equal opposing force to the torture of having to retcon your brain to treat someone as a victim. Like when somebody comes back from Vietnam, that space was left in your life, so there's almost like an inherent understanding that things have changed and you have to approach them differently. Whereas here, she didn't have that. He left on Thursday, and on Friday she has a wounded warrior and has to reframe her whole interactions with him. That's that maybe not equally, but that's also
it is its own. Yeah, it is its own punishment. It is its own trauma, but also we're dealing with a trauma that took place over 20 years, but people can have something happen on their way to work.
You're right.
That causes lifelong trauma instantly with no warning as well.
That's a really great point. So this is sort of both those things for him, right?
It is, yeah. It's fascinating, which is why we've been talking about all these things. We're still in Act 2 because it's fascinating. It's a really fascinating sci-fi concept as well as the execution here. So in Act 3, Worf and O'Brien are playing darts in Quarks, but O'Brien doesn't quite remember the rules. It's been 20 years. Then he sees Ichen walking through the bar, the hallucination. So O'Brien follows him into the promenade. Later, Jake, now a teacher, again, fascinating execution of the story here. Jake is now refreshing Miles on all of his engineering tools because it's not just the trauma. It's been 20 years since he did anything.
Feels like it's been 20 years since we've seen Jake.
Right, 20 years since he's seen Jake, but like, or let's stay with where we were 20 years ago. We knew the blocking then.
Yeah.
We knew the words then, sort of. But like, imagine like having to go on in Titanic today, 20 years later. I'd be like, I remember some of it, but I sure as hell am not ready to go on.
Yeah, it's true.
So O'Brien is nervous about embarrassing himself in front of his employees. Later, O'Brien works for a while in a Jeffries tube, and he's now a sort of intern, but also still sort of in charge. He pretends to be okay, but he's not actually doing that well. Julian then comes in and asks him why he's not going to therapy. Apparently, a few weeks have gone by. And he explains, O'Brien does, that he doesn't want to rehash his trauma over and over again. He just wants to forget it and go back to his life, which is always the most effective way to treat trauma. It is funny because it's so, you see it externally here, it's so obvious. Like, what are you doing? But I don't know how many people I know who have said the exact same thing.
Oh God,
and
countless.
To their own detriment and the detriment of the people around them.
I actually thought this was an opportunity for the episode. I thought maybe they were going to bring in Dr. Troy.
It would have been a great opportunity for.
I thought because maybe he'd be more comfortable with someone he had an experience with, but I guess I was wishful casting.
It's a great idea. The problem with that is that then you make it about Marina coming back.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's too much because it's Troy. Oh my God, Troy's on Deep Space Nine, and it's not that anymore. But yes, absolutely, that would have been a great cameo there.
Because there's something about, well, once again, I'm asking for more than it is. The focus is clearly on O'Brien, but I think what that therapy is actually really interesting too, right? It's because right now it's the therapy is used as sort of like take this pill, right? The actual work is not explored, but that's asking a lot.
It would have been, again, I think this could have been a 3-hour episode, and we could have spent a lot of time in his therapy. I think that would have been fascinating, but 45 minutes, that's all they got, which is more than he would get today, because I think today it's 42. So, anyway, O'Brien snaps at Bashir and tells him to get the hell away from him and storms out. We flash back to the cell. And more time has passed, and O'Brien is again distressed. He's pacing angrily, and Ichan is annoyed by him. They begin to shout at each other. We can see that O'Brien is starting to crack up. He starts banging on the walls and demanding to leave. And people start shouting, and an alarm goes off. Back on Deep Space Nine, O'Brien snaps at Odo, then apologizes, but then he goes into Quark, who is busy, and we see the trauma really overtaking O'Brien here, and he threatens to break every bone in Quark's body.
And that Bolian is into it.
Yeah, he's like, yeah.
Look at that. She's like, yes, dude, be rough.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that lady seems concerned. That Bolian is like, I'm going to think about this later.
Go back and watch that scene again, because she gives him the eye full up and down.
Like, going for it. So, poor O'Brien sulks off to a private place and hallucinates Ichan again. And Ichan says, I might just be in your head, but I'm real to you. I'm your friend. You need me. And, and I think that O'Brien's anger here is very, I'm really glad that a therapist was a part of the writing of this because it's very real. And sort of the fear and the anger and the frustration and the desire for isolation, the impatience, these are all classic signs of PTSD, and I think they play it pretty honestly.
Yeah.
They play it pretty well here
too, right?
Yeah. And it's seeing how trauma can pull you so far out of your character because you're in fight or flight. You're in desperation. You're in panic mode, and it causes you to lash out like this. It's a very
and the episode here. I think it's interesting because clearly there's escalation, and they have to truncate how long that could take. And it really risks, the pacing really risks this getting samey, but I think they do a really good job of different ways to escalate it, right? Clearly he starts with his closest friends because that's very true to life. Then it starts to branch out until it gets to where we're going to get to the climax.
And you begin with someone trying to hide it, and it's slowly cracking and unraveling.
And it's also, it's fair for him to want to be alone for a while. So
absolutely,
it's masked behind that sort of what seems to be a very triage need. So
and I think that the pressure that everybody feels with trauma to appear as if they don't, right? Whether you're hiding it from yourself, you're hiding it from your loved ones because you're embarrassed or you don't want to overwhelm them, or you feel like you're being unreasonable, or whatever it is, it always is going to come out. It's part of its very nature is that it is impossible to control without help. And so I think that they really did. Wolf really structures this well. Like, you're right with the escalation, but the logical progression as it moves forward. So in Act 4, the next morning, O'Brien is continuing to hallucinate Ichan, and Ichan is concerned about O'Brien. And Miles says, "For the first time, I feel good," to Ichan. And he says, "Then why am I here?" Again, denial, such a big part of this. Cisco summons O'Brien to his office. He arrives, and Cisco asks him about his confrontations with Bashir and Quark, and the fact that he's stopped seeing his therapist. He's being relieved of duty and assigned daily counseling until the doctor determines. O'Brien asks for one more chance, but Cisco holds his ground. "If you don't go to therapy, I will confine you to the infirmary."
Missed opportunity to be more overt in the writing here, but I see it in the subtext, because there's a moment where Cisco's like, I wish I could give you this extra chance, but I can't, right? My hands are tied. And I feel like part of that, in my headcanon, I wish he had said it out loud though, is, of all the people on the station, Cisco actually has direct one-to-one empathy, because didn't Cisco get zapped into an alternate universe and have to live an entire life? Live, die, and watch his son live and die, and then get zapped back to reality, and everybody else around him was just like, nah, as if it never happened. So Cisco actually kind of went through the exact same thing.
Yeah, although he didn't experience
less
the
torture.
Time. He saw like flashes of it, as opposed to the whole.
It wasn't real time for him.
So for him, it was, he had 45 minutes here, 45 minutes there, 45 minutes there. But he certainly knows what it's like to have weird time head problems. So O'Brien, even though this is the right thing that Cisco has to do, O'Brien is pissed, and he tosses his communicator into the elevator aggressively and goes to confront Julian.
Which I enjoyed, because it made it feel like that was actually a real metal thing, which I was always wondering if it was like a real prop or just kind of like a plastic thing, but it sounded pretty real.
Well, as you know, sound can be whatever you could sound like a hot dog hitting a wall if
but
a sound designer
props.
wanted it to.
They are metal, right? The ones they're wearing?
Yeah, they are.
That'd be a cool Etsy, or a prop to buy, like a used prop.
There's a lot of those out there. Oh yeah,
really,
for sure. My when I was a kid, my uncle got me one, and I thought it was a real prop, and I told all my friends it was a real prop. It wasn't. It was something they sold at the gift shop.
Well, still,
whatever. It looked cool. I still have it. Anyway, I really like the messiness of O'Brien's emotional reaction here, because it's Star Trek. Even when you're like flipping out, they don't necessarily allow you to actually flip out. It has to be a little bit like Trekkie, and I loved his like actual anger there, that flash there, which was great. So he goes to confront Julian.
Well, and he's of all the guys, he's I think would feel the most emasculated, right? He's a soldier. He's been through this kind of thing before. If anybody can handle it, I can handle it. They're treating me like a baby.
Sure. And we talked about in our last episode just how much combat he's been through. Like, O'Brien has been through it, and that's why we have O'Brien Must Suffer, and this episode being one of the classic examples of that. But he's been through it. And so they have the following confrontation. O'Brien says, "How do you know what's best for me? You have no idea what I've been going through." Bashir says, "You're right. You were alone in that cell. I wasn't there with you. I didn't see what they did to you, but I do know you suffered and you're still suffering now, and I'm trying to help. I never asked for your help. You didn't need to ask. I'm your doctor and your friend. Ichen shows up and says Bashir's right. O'Brien says, don't you get it? You're not my friend. Not anymore. That O'Brien that was your friend died in that cell. Bashir says he's not dead. He just needs a little help, that's all. Stay away from me. I don't want your help. I don't want your friendship. I just want to be left alone. Again, classic PTSD. The desperation to be isolated. So Ichen continues to chase O'Brien through the station. You know, sooner or later you'll have to tell someone about me. Like hell I will. You can't run from me forever. You're dead. So why don't you go away and leave me alone? You want me to leave? I'll leave. Send me away. Don't you see? If I keep coming back, it's because a part of you keeps bringing me back here. Again, trauma, right? It's like literal trauma speaking to you and chasing you. And he's like literally chasing him through the station, which is, such a good sci-fi metaphor for the experience of that. O'Brien finally arrives home. He's been walking for an hour. Keiko is worried, and Molly is there asking him to look at her drawings over and over again, and he snaps and starts screaming at her. He finally comes to his senses and is horrified. So he goes to the cargo bay alone and starts smashing through the containers with a giant wrench. I didn't see any Cassidy Yates stickers, but I know you were looking, Mike. Then he sees the weapons locker and unlocks it and grabs a phaser. He turns it up to kill and aims it at himself.
That was like maybe one of the darker sequences in Trek. It's got to be.
Oh, for sure.
I was like, I don't know that there's ever been like a straight suicide scene before like this.
I don't think so. Certainly not of one of our major characters.
Like grab phaser, intentionally turn to kill, which you clearly boop and then put on your chin. It's very overt.
Yeah, I mean it's not unclear what's happening here. So in Act 5, before he shoots, Bashir finds him. You don't want to do this, Chief. The hell I don't. Look, I don't claim to know what you're going through, but whatever it is, it's not worth dying for. You don't understand at all. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this to protect Keiko and Molly and everyone else on the station. Protect us from what? From me. I'm not the man I used to be. I'm dangerous. I nearly hit Molly today, and all she wanted was a little attention, and I nearly hit her. And oof. Tough. It's really tough stuff. So Brian then finally mentions Ichar. He admits that he was with him for all but a week or two of his sentence. We flash back, and old man O'Brien is still suffering. They're both starving, and they haven't been fed in a long time, the longest time yet. They go to sleep, but something is off. O'Brien wakes up in the middle of the night to see Ichar sneaking some food that he's secretly hidden. He gets up and attacks Ichar, and they fight until Ichar's neck snaps. O'Brien, unaware that Ichar is dead, grabs the food and deduces somehow, this is a wormhole for me, that he was saving it for both of them. He returns and discovers that he has killed his friend. Back to the scene on Deep Space Nine, O'Brien says that the next day they started feeding him again. And I'm going to read this monologue but not perform it because freaking Colomini destroyed this.
So they start feeding him afterwards, which means they totally wanted him this to occur this way.
Yeah, so I think in my headcanon, this is part of the story.
Yes.
That is the sentence. I think that everybody sentenced to this has an Ichan and eventually kills him before the end.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, what the agency's the question, right? They set up this scenario. Maybe they don't kill him, but clearly Ichan was goading him as well when they get to the fight.
Kind of,
sort of, yeah. And then like you said, how are you to know that he was saving for both of us? But that could also just be him starting the process of the self-torture, right? That they wanted him.
Right. I mean, that's the. Yeah. And like it's fascinating to really get into that, and we'll never know. But it is, yeah. So here's what he says. So Bashir says, but it was a mistake. You didn't mean it. And O'Brien says, I meant it. I wanted him to die. Which is one thing. My other question about it is like, is the death an accident or not? And I think here he says, it wasn't. I wanted him to die. I kept telling myself that it doesn't matter. It wasn't real, but it's a lie. If it had been real, if it had been you instead of him, it wouldn't have made any difference. He was my best friend and I murdered him. When we were growing up, they used to tell us humanity had evolved, that mankind had outgrown hate and rage. But when it came down to it, when I had a chance to show that no matter what anyone did to me, I was still an evolved human being, I failed. I repaid his kindness with blood. I was no better than an animal.
Which is also, don't forget, this is the next episode after almost very similar questions were being asked of Worf in those moments.
Yeah.
In the moment of decision-making in battle, life or death. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Celebrated on the Klingon side, right? This choice would have been the celebrated choice.
That's right. Yeah. And it is one of the essential questions of Deep Space Nine. Right? When challenged, our evolved humanity, does it hold up?
Mm-hmm.
Also, just an astoundingly good performance by Colin Meaney here.
Yeah, just the whole episode, but
he's so good the whole episode, and just like his restraint this whole time, and then finally breaking down here, but doing it in a way. They say acting, the best acting is feeling the emotion and fighting against it. And you see all of that there. Just unbelievable. I mean, there's a reason Colin Meaney is such a respected actor, but like that is just phenomenal work.
I mean, the closest we can really make an analogy for ourselves is, those dreams you have that are so real that you wake up and you're confused. Right?
Yeah.
Just multiply that by 1,000,000, clearly. And what if in that dream you did something that you just didn't think you were capable of doing? Right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine murdering somebody in a dream, viscerally, one of those, and you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even think I was capable of that.
Right. Then you start questioning, like, well, I just imagined that. Why did I imagine that? Why did I, like, how did that get into my head? What was I doing? It's fascinating. So Bashir responds, no. An animal would have killed Ichar and not had a second thought, never shed a tear. But not you. You hate yourself. You hate yourself so much you think you deserve to die. The Agrathi did everything they could do to strip you of your humanity, and in the end, for one brief moment, they succeeded. But you can't let that brief moment define your entire life. If you pull that trigger, then the Agrathi have won. They will have destroyed a good man. You can never let that happen, my friend. And I wrote down here, wow, has Alex Siddig profoundly improved as an actor here as well.
Well, and also the trust in him, right? I mean, you saw what they were writing for him in season 1, and here in season 4, they're like, clearly he can handle this. Because let me tell you, the compassion, the empathy is not just in the character, like you said. Clearly it is performed, and it is superb. Like, any questions are kind of on the fencings, feeling of staleness maybe in this episode that I was feeling for a minute, of just like considering maybe if there was more interesting stories they told. All of that totally wiped away by the collaborative performance here, because everybody on the station is very good and pretty. I love the choices they made to write everybody very compassionate towards Miles, and they showed great way for the wife to proceed, great way for his also want to shout out his colleague that he's the boss of, his underling.
Yeah.
When he's in the Jeffries tube, and he's like, Estelle, I'm getting a hold of it. And the guy, like, with humor, still gave him a pat on the back. He's like, I'm sure you'll be running this place in a week. Don't worry about it. We've got your back. And I'm like, that is excellent scene, an excellent compassion showing here. But nobody compares to the way Siddig performs this. It's just exquisite.
And I think that as a general note about the message of the episode, and I'll say it here because he mentions it in in what Bashir says. Because they tried to strip you of your humanity, and for that one brief moment, they did succeed. And that the number one most damaging part about trauma in a lot of cases is the fact that you did have a moment where it went wrong. and that the hardest part of trauma is frequently guilt and shame, and that is what is killing him here. It's not suffering, it's not being hungry, it's not any of that. It's guilt and shame that he feels.
I think that, we generally wear our feelings here. I think that is, and I have no experience. When you think about the military, and you think about war, and you think about people coming back from war, and you think about people who've had to do atrocious things, kill people, maim people, kill civilians, kids, women, things like that, under a flag, right? Justified under the act of war, but when you get to your base humanity, what separates us from the beasts, right? I don't care what your justification is. I don't care if you're just killing a Nazi, right? At some point in your sort of psyche, there's that all of the very fiber of your being is like, do you do that, right? Is that, I couldn't even watch, I was reading that story about the new humane gas that they tried to kill that guy with, and you're just like,
humane, sure.
Look, I can find in my heart the reasons why the death penalty makes sense, right? Just like on its face, why like the type of people that should deserve this. But then when you hear about the act of it happening and you're like, this just doesn't feel right. It's a core thing. And to have been forced or chosen to or whatever to override that core initiative, I don't know, that's what trauma is, right?
Well, absolutely. And that's and like, there are many traumas, accidents and injury and pain and that kind of stuff, but I think the stuff that is really the most destructive is when you get forced to compromise yourself, right? And even you take it outside of like a war or prison, like this, like the most traumatic thing for victims of sexual abuse is the feeling like they were a part of it in some fashion, and it's the guilt and the shame about the confusing feeling, that kind of stuff, and that is like, in a lot of ways, the worst kind of trauma. And which is why this is not about he was cold and hungry and alone. It's his, like I said, it's the guilt and the shame, and that's what needs to be taken over there.
When we're talking about trauma a lot, especially in our society and a lot of the things that, the power dynamics at play.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of times, I think people make an assumption about the agency of people who are being preyed upon and abused, right? Thinking that at any given time you have the ability to say, I don't want to do this anymore. Or if you're a young child who is being taken advantage of, and they could have just run and told a friend or a family. Like, the power dynamic plays into that.
Absolutely. And the people who do that to themselves the worst are the victims. Yeah. And that is part of the inherent. And
that's before you even get to then everybody slut-shaming people or not believing people, or that's just a whole other layers of the onion.
The external trauma of not being believed, of being held responsible for something that's not your responsibility. But like, as a therapist, your primary job is to get that person to realize they didn't have the agency there, and to work through.
And I think ultimately being seen and not normalizing, but destigmatizing back in 96, like this episode does, is its greatest strength. And I think we'll talk about that more.
I mean, it's absolutely handled beautifully. And Bashir knows exactly what the issue is here. The issue is he feels so bad because he did have a moment where he broke down. And that's what he has to work through. He has to forgive himself for that problem there. Anyway, O'Brien or Bashir takes the gun, and Ichar says, "Be well, Miles," and disappears. Later, Bashir gives O'Brien some antidepressant, anti-hallucination medication, and he knows he's going to have to keep up his therapy, which I love the fact that, like, you're beginning a process here, not ending the process. And that is real life. But then he returns to his family, who are grateful to see him. And that is the episode. Whew, we've talked about this a lot, but we have plenty more to talk about in our after show.
AlamarEmmys, count to 4. AlamarEmmys, let one
Okay. So let's talk about wormholes in the plot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you got there's some specifics. My one specific is silly, but like it's just production stuff. Like obviously, if 20 years and you were starving for any given period of time, there'd probably be some visual differences in your look.
What you talking about?
I always love when they make a chubby Tevye and you're like, I thought they were starving. Like, what's he eating? But also more so, it's the vocal choice. Like, just because you've been in solitary for 20 years, all of a sudden he got an old man O'Brien voice, which was like, why are we doing that? Okay, so that's my trite ones. Somewhat tongue in cheek. And then I guess it's just all the fruit left on the vine. I'm gonna put in wormholes, even if it's intentional. It's just there's a lot of questions about the legality and the torture aspect of it that don't really get addressed. But I guess Bashir does at the end, so I'll allow it. But that's other than that, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I was looking for there to be more into the symbolism of what they were drawing, but that was just meditated practices. I don't, I'll let you talk about there is some ambiguity as to like what was intentional on their part.
Right.
And I think that is
which I think is okay. I think it's intentionally ambiguous, like his agency in that situation. He clearly experienced it as if he had full agency.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know externally whether he really did. And is that not the exploration of trauma?
Yeah.
Right? We all think we experience it as if we all had full agency in a lot of the trauma that we went through. If I hadn't have stopped for that sandwich, I wouldn't have been hit by the bus. If I hadn't have worn that thing, that assault wouldn't have happened. If I hadn't whatever. And I think we all believe just by default that we have way more agency than we actually did, and part of the work is being able to adjudicate that more objectively. And so I think that's part of the story. For me, the only sort of wormhole, which and maybe that's part of the thing, is that it's just him assuming that Ichan was saving food for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, why did he assume that? I don't know. Maybe that's as part of their relationship. Maybe that was part of the programming. Maybe he needed to feel bad about it. Like maybe that was his own guilt after having killed him. He thought he must have been.
Because let's say that their intention is to F with you as much as possible, right? Which is pretty clear that it is.
Yeah.
Because they were intentionally starving them in this simulation. Well, then if they make it thus that it wasn't ambiguous, that he was clearly stealing from him, then it's probably more possible for you after the fact to be like, well, he deserved it.
He doesn't feel
to
as
survive,
bad.
Right?
Yeah.
I needed to survive. But if it was
they needed to stick the dagger in his heart even more. And is the guilt part of what they thought of as the rehabilitation?
Or the punishment, right? If we're not actually taking the 20 years from you, then we're going to make sure to enact.
We're going to make
punishment.
you hate yourself.
Yeah, some suffering must take place.
Which is, it's all very Catholic, right? And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So I'm not sure it's a wormhole or not. Let's talk about Besma, and I think it's fairly clear.
I mean, the monologue, Colmini's performance, but I'm going to throw my weight behind Siddiq here because for me, as much as it's an exploration of trauma, right? And it is, and PTSD, and it's also a really amazing meditation on empathy. And it really could have been, like I said, difficult for people to even comprehend. Like Kira made me fear the episode was going to be about people not quite understanding his trauma. But instead, what it turns into is a group of people not understanding it, but trying to be open and available to supporting it. And there's no conflict of anyone who just like doesn't get it or not.
Everybody's trying their best. Everyone genuinely is trying their best.
Even Quark, right? Where you're like, oh, is he going to sell him out? They don't do a comedy beat. He just tells Cisco what's up because he's worried about him. I think it's just beautiful in that way.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and for me, I'll just, Column's monologue, right? And seeing the restraint he had as a performer to go 43 of the 46 minutes never breaking down, always holding on to it, and then you think like he's not gonna, maybe he doesn't have the ability, whatever, and then boom, there it is, and like, there goes your heart. It's crushed and it's dead. And
So, as part of your trivia, let's just like spend 1 minute and then we'll jump into stem bolts, which we'll sum up quickly. Let's just do a thought exercise of, okay, so clearly there was conversation about not having the hallucination character follow him into, and do we think it was a good choice to have him? Do you think it was effective?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Absolutely, I do. Because, like, it's, you have this ability to physicalize, to manifest PTSD as something visual. Mm-hmm. And, like, it's sci-fi. That's the whole point, is you're able to do this. And I think you could have done this even if it weren't sci-fi. But I think to have a physical manifestation that appears to have agency, but it's really just your trauma speaking. And, I think for people who have gone through it, and I'm certainly a person who has, right? It's not a person talking to you, but damn, does it feel like it has agency sometime. Mm-hmm. And boy, do you feel like you're in a conversation, you're in a battle with it and it is literally following you around, commenting on everything you're doing.
Well, not only that, and why I think it is effective is because it's not just commenting on everything. And whereas it does make you, I guess, question whether is it really in his head or is it just leftover juice from the but I think that's overshadowed by the fact that it's not just, whilst it's walking around and being very supportive and seems to be very friendly towards him and still loves him, all that's doing is serving to haunt and torture him because of it's more guilt of what he ended up doing. Right. So I think like you said, it's a great way to anthropomorphize the actual trauma. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's hand out some self-sealing. Let's do so with a segue that is very empathetic in its own nature. Oh, we knew we missed one. We're gonna hear just the end of it, folks.
Here's some stem bolts.
Hell yeah! Oh, you're close.
There we go.
What is that chord? That like weird suspension there at the end. I love it.
Oh, I think it's a major seven. It's sort of like basically an F major 7.
There's like that one suspended like it's yeah.
Oh yeah.
The blue note. What's the blue note?
So yeah, it's actually sort of like an F sharp minor major 7.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I can't speak of obsession. Okay, so listen. Once again, balls, right? Just balls. 96, coming off a courtroom drama where they're like, let's just do something completely we've never done before, like with that camera device. And here it's like, let's go deep. I mean, it's an interesting. It's not even about prison and torture. It's not even about that.
No.
But it says so much about it, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to be careful not to over Keith it, which is, remember how last week I was like, oh, I'm just like making it about something I don't think it's about. But it is, right? Like the best work leaves that negative space where you could. There is somebody. I would say this. Definitely there's more people in the writer's room that have your very stark opinion, very firm opinion on the death penalty and torture than not, I would say.
For sure.
But since it's not about that, I don't think I won't spend too much time on it. Although I just feel like it has it says it without saying it, right?
Yeah.
It's clearly torture and it's clearly inhumane and it clearly almost killed a man.
Yeah.
Especially solitary confinement, which I just find to be the most torturous of all torture.
It's torture. It's just flat torture.
Okay. I often commend, for especially where it is firmly in the 90s and what media was like in the 90s, the very normalizing of a emotional male-to-male friendship that they do with Bashir and O'Brien. And I don't think we can overstate how different that is than a lot of ways comedy handles it, right? Even look with how they tried to do Joey and Chandler later in Friends, and even then it was so jokey, and we couldn't just tell each other how we feel. We had to
right. Well, I mean, there's like this. It's like half like homophobia, like, oh yeah, we're dudes, which is like laced in
And
misogyny.
I think
It's
you
very
commented
weird.
on it a few weeks ago, maybe last week, when Keiko comes home and they have to break up a little bit, and we couldn't even just like overtly be like, "Hey, man, it sucks that we can't hang out anymore." But here we drop all of that because this is the most beautiful, lovely way to express empathy between friends, and they have Bashir do it. Like horn-toed Bashir from season 1 is now this like fully three-dimensional, cultured, empathetic.
And did I not tell you that Bashir was gonna gonna fix him?
And he isn't doing it. And what's beautiful about this episode too, in that is that he's not just doing it as his doctor. He doesn't hide behind doing it as his doctor. He says overtly, "I'm your friend, and I care about you, and I want." And it's just so great. And it's as much about that empathy as it is about trying to give an analog for people to understand this type of toy. It's clear that they consulted with people who understand this at a fundamental level, and were discussing ways to express it that regular people could kind of understand.
Yeah.
And, the O'Brien must suffer trope in this case actually, I think, hurts the message, because it can happen to anybody. This trauma isn't reserved for people who have been tortured or have been through like the worst of the worst.
It's not O'Brien must suffer. It's we know Colin can handle this.
Yes, true. They say as much, right?
That's really the story behind O'Brien must suffer. Is
I just mean
we
in the
trust
dialogue
Colin can
about
handle
it,
this.
it can easily get just tossed in that bucket, and it's not really just about that. It's not about that at all. It's he can handle it, and he is the everyman, and so I think it's saying
exactly right. Yeah.
He's a family man, and he to his daughter, to this cute little Molly who's still trying real hard not to look at the camera.
Yeah.
It's just really well done. Now, every fiber in me wants to fight against, well, nothing in the big story's happening. There's no fault. There's no ramifications. It's so isolated. Next week, we're going to forget this even happened. And that's probably true. But, man, and it probably saved them a lot of money because it was just two guys in a cell for the most of the show.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's even good from that standpoint. I just think it very intentionally set out to be a meditation on trauma, the ubiquity of trauma, and the empathy needed to address that trauma. And it even goes as far as to normalize therapy in a way that this is not happening.
Yeah.
In the mid 90s without a wink and a nod, at least.
Right. You got to be crazy.
Yeah. Or have gone through like a torturous thing. I wish, but there's no way to like normalize it. Because listen, Keith and I very much believe everybody. I don't care what your trauma is and how quote unquote insignificant it is in the shadow of being tortured. Right. But look, can't have it all. So I don't know that there's any way for me to not give this an A+, and so I'm going to say 93 self-sealing stem bolts. 93,
yeah. And I won't belabor it because I've sort of said all that I want to say about this episode, other than to say, like, I completely agree. I also wrote down a 93. I think it's a fantastic episode. I think it is an incredible showcase for Colin, obviously, but I think for Robert Hewitt Wolfe as a writer, right? I think it speaks to something about his marriage, right? Because this is written from the perspective of a therapist, from someone who really understands trauma and psychology and people, and it's such a well-informed piece of writing. And again, this is 1996. Like, this is well ahead of what I think anything else we were seeing on television, really understanding all of that, giving it the space and time to breathe. I think structuring it as an entire episode in the aftermath speaks to that, right? This isn't a tag, the last 10 minutes of an episode. It is the episode. And I think that it's just so well done, so well constructed. And I think doing it in a way, okay, we're going to get it. I'm going to say something controversial right now, but
no,
like,
not Keith.
Like, Discovery tries to treat all of these things with this same weight and the same respect. And I appreciate the attempt of it. But it is so relentless and so bleak and dark that we don't have a reference point to balance it off of. You know, we don't have O'Brien, like normal O'Brien, his normal life, he's this, and then something bad happens to him and you see a change. With Discovery, I'm having a hard time getting through it because, like, there is no normal. There's no happy. It's just constant. It feels just wallowing in endless trauma talk. And, like, I love trauma talk, right? But there's nothing, there's no light. It's just endless people being traumatized without ever having a baseline. So, whereas this feels like seasoning in a great meal, as opposed to it's just a bowl of salt. You know what I mean? So I don't know. On the whole, anyway, to answer the question, I wrote down 93 before you said 93. So I think we are in agreement that Hard Time, it's not a good time, but it is great television. So there you go. Mike, tell them about the other shows.
Guys, I mean, I mentioned a previous episode of Strange New Worlds, and guess what? There have been 2 seasons, and we talked about every episode of both those seasons. You can check it out on Strange New Show, available on your podcast feeds and entirely on the YouTubes. David E. Kelly, all 8 seasons of The Practice. We talked ad nauseum, so many hours you can listen to us talk. Look at my Star Trek toys, Keith. We got to do another episode. We've run out of reserves.
We sure do.
That drops on the weekends, Geekly on Mondays, and of course, you're here watching us talk about Deep Space Nine. You can watch me watch it. Patreon.com/KNM. We're gonna do something fun for the patrons coming up soon because we've got the time in our schedules. We've got to do it. We promised it's coming. We gotta watch something. Pick a movie or something, Keith. It'd be fun.
Yeah, it'd be fun. So, and as we always do, to finish it out, this episode on IMDb, this episode got an 8.2, which puts it squeaking into the top 30 episodes of Deep Space Nine. Up next week, we're going to be talking about Shattered Mirror. So here we go. We will see you back then. Till then, you have been watching Keith and Mike watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
This is Cheetah Rivera.
And that's my Rosie. I'm so glad she chose me. Life is one sweet, beautiful song to me.
Oh, we'll have us a home out west, a nice little, sweet little nest, and in every room, roses in bloom.
But there's one rose sweeter than all of the rest.
When love is right, then what can be wrong? Life is one sweet, beautiful song.